Hi, we're sisters Elaine and Brenda.
Welcome to the Body Wealth Podcast, a space for conversation about the wealth that really matters.
Your best health.
Welcome, Celeste. It's really good to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Feeling good.
That's good. Before we get into the topic, we want you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
I am from Brooklyn, New York, born and bred, now living in Greensboro, North Carolina. I'm a physician. I started out as an obstetrician gynecologist. Now I'm in public health, and I work at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. I have 3 children. I have a daughter, and I have twin boys. They are young adults out of my house. And I am newly remarried.
Congratulations.
And enjoying my life with my husband.
Okay, great. Well, as you said, you are a native New Yorker, born and bred. And how did that, growing up in New York, sort of figure into your identity?
Oh, everything about it. I mean, I laugh because coming up to Brown, I remember thinking, who are you if you're not from New York City? I mean, when I landed on campus, I was part of the whole New York contingent. I was like, we are it.
And I can testify the New Yorkers absolutely had that attitude. You're from DC, what?
I mean, it was so much a part of my identity. It's now looking back on it and having raised my kids here in the South, for the most part, it's just like New York was such a unique space. It was just so diverse, not in just terms of people and culture, but food and neighborhoods. And, in this micro area, you had a sense of the world, okay, and who you interacted with. It was very culturally rich, not only as being an African American, and understanding my history, because all of my peeps were like teachers. I had all these women who were teachers and who were very much interested in exposing us young folks to whatever the world had to offer. Like I said, it was just rich. That's how I think of it. It was really rich for me. It was being a young person and being able to travel the city alone, okay, with my friends, and just the freedom I felt, the cultural arts experience, and less so the athletic experience. It's funny, when I came to the South, that's kind of the bigger thing. The young kids are all athletes. Whereas growing up in New York, we were musicians and dancers and artists. It had much more of an artistic bent to it.
That's interesting.
So it was really a part. And also the whole academic drive. And that I think, apart from New York, that was our parents who really kind of instilled that in us, to really just be motivated to excel academically. So a lot of my life growing up was about enrichment.
When you left New York for school, did you think you were coming back? And what were your thoughts generally about the South?
Well, after Brown, I went to med school in New York City, and I was in New York City for a while. So I was a true New Yorker. You couldn't convince me to leave New York City. So my thoughts of the South as I was a child growing up was scary. Honestly, it's what I read in textbooks about, the civil rights movement and the policemen with the dogs attacking the Black protesters, and Martin Luther King getting shot, and Medgar Evers getting shot. And I mean, it was violent. It was violent. It was scary. It was the KKK. I wanted nothing to do with it. Right. Wasn't interested.
So then how did you come to move to North Carolina?
Enter in my husband. He's from North Carolina. Okay. My former husband's North Carolinian. And we ended up getting married, and all he kept talking about was the South. And I was like, I don't know, I'm not too.
So you met him in New York?
I met him in New York. He was working in New York at the time, and we had no intention of coming south. So what had happened was I ended up having major back surgery. I was working as an obstetrician gynecologist, and I was born with a malformation in my spine. Didn't know it throughout my whole life. Danced, was active. It was not until after I had my twins and I had some stress in my body and I'm working that it manifested. And I ended up having a couple of surgeries. His mom came, up to help me. I laughed because I'm the last kid. Like, so my mother was like, I don't do that anymore. I don't babysit like that anymore. So my mother-in-law, she came up. She was so helpful. And after my surgery, we really had to have some reckoning of what my career was going to look like, given
Mm.
what my ability was. And she was just so funny. She kept going, y'all should just move. You should move. You should move. You know, free care, free help with the kids. I mean, she was just really funny. And we talked about it. And I finally,
There's great value in that. Yeah.
oh, not, I didn't really appreciate it at the time. And I agreed to it. And my family was like, what? Are you crazy? Why are you moving south? And my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was part of the Great Migration coming from Virginia to New York, but she kept just frowning at me. She goes, do you know what you're doing?
Oh, because of maybe her childhood experiences.
Right, right. But nonetheless, this grandmother used to take me down to Virginia. She was from Hampton. Loved to go visit, but she didn't want to stay there for
Right.
the long term. In any case, that gave me some pause, because my grandmother, she's got a lot of sage and she's kind of not understanding. And I'm like, no, you don't understand, Nana. Black folks are doing the reverse thing. And she was like, the white people I knew down there, I can't believe that they've changed. But, I went on faith. And it wasn't easy. I came down here in 2005. So it's almost 20 years ago. It was a cultural change. It was a big cultural shift.
What was hard?
It's not that overall, I felt welcomed and I felt good. I knew I made a very good move for my family culturally in terms of the people. And I will divide it between Black and white people. So growing up in New York, politics wasn't foremost in my head because you live in a climate with people who pretty much think the way you do ideologically. I'm a Democrat. And it's funny because I knew Black folks who were Republicans growing up. So this wasn't this divide to me until I came down here and realized the Republicans are a different breed of Republicans. Okay, in the South. It's more social conservatism than it was, in my opinion. In the Northeast, it was more financial. Okay, I mean, I knew many Republicans who seemed very liberal to me in the Northeast. Okay, I was the first time I realized you really had to think before you opened your mouth to talk about politics and where you may be. People think differently from you. I honestly say this, when I first met some African Americans here, I clearly felt like I was an outsider. Okay, because I thought differently in terms of just my acceptance of things new. Okay, just wanting to try something new. It was not even a thing for me coming from New York City to kind of just be exposed to anything different and be okay with it right away. And I could feel, and this is including my former husband's family, just to kind of like this reticence or this apprehension of like letting people in. So I felt like an outsider for a minute. I mean, it was weird. I mean, even though I was welcomed, I can sense that I was just clearly different
Otherness
from a lot of Southern African Americans. But really, what really helped me was my parents' friends retired from New York, and now they were true New Yorkers. So she was a nurse and he was the headmaster of a private school in Manhattan. They decided to retire in Durham. And I would go visit them all the time because I just needed that parental thing to go, did I make a mistake? And they were like, no, everything you're feeling is correct, but give it time because there's a lot of wealth down here. It's great living, and they helped me, come up with some strategies to feel comfortable, and really kind of give me some education to the South and Southern people, Black and white, over time. And that's just one area. But I had 3 kids. And in terms of moving here, to me, it was phenomenal what I could do with my kids and I couldn't do in the Northeast.
Like what?
The amount of activities they were involved in. It was like in the Northeast, so much stuff is inaccessible or it's considered like privileged. And it is just a way of life down here. I mean, a lot of sporting activity, even like horseback riding. It's like, that's something like, ooh, who goes horseback riding in New York City? But like, you find people down here who have farms. who have horses, and the kids
So
go
it
do
was
horseback.
easy to do those things
Yeah,
that
it was
might have
just
been
easier
harder.
to
Yeah.
do that. And also, my former husband was a big tennis player. So that was interesting because so many of the people I knew played tennis in the Northeast were white folks. And then I come upon this huge community of Black people play tennis. So it was like, to me, things were just easy. Going to the museums with my kids, just so many like children's activities. So for me, I was like, this is the jackpot. There's no line, there's no parking.
Now, how did your kids feel? How old were your kids when you made that move?
My daughter, oh wow, she went into second grade, and my sons were, oh, speaking of which, and so my sons had to go to preschool. They went to historically Black college preschool,
Cool.
totally different environment. I mean, think about this. My kids used to get happy on Wednesday because they used to have fried chicken and mac and cheese.
Just Wednesdays, though.
It's Wednesday.
But that's true. And they were like 2, 3 years old.
They were 3, 4 because it was 2 years before they started kindergarten.
So they don't really remember living up north there.
No.
Their
My
whole
daughter, she remembers having to put on a snowsuit to go to school.
Oh yeah, the weather. That must have made
Yeah.
a difference in your life.
I was concerned because I'm one of those few people who really likes snow. I like when the weather's miserable, only because it reminds me of being in the house and eating good food. We cooked and ate and watched movies, but once again, I wasn't so worried about the snow. We could go visit the snow, but in terms of having kids, having to get dressed and get ready for school, it was a lot easier.
Whenever you make a big move like that, it takes time to find your people wherever you're going. And, overall, I do agree the feeling is different, but especially now, you have every kind of community almost everywhere, but just may take some time to find them. So I feel like you found your people in North Carolina right now.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, Elaine, because I had a friend, she also came from Brooklyn. So it was like helping her get used to it. And I said, don't worry, you're going to find your people. They're going to find you. We find each other. We really do. And it's not just my people. I mean, some of my best friends, and one of whom you went to school with, Elaine, she's from here, and it was just great to have her because I'd always say, you got to help me understand how you grew up among some of the people here. How do you live side by side? And she really educated me a lot, and her whole family. So I talked about as a kid, I thought the South was so scary, and how could Black people stay down in the South? And I now have so much reverence for older Black people who educated, who were professionals down here. I mean, they're just this different breed of folks who really are steadfast, very confident, and what they instilled in their kids. I say wealth, not just financially, but the wealth, the foundation that they have. It's just so impressive to me. They were that tree with the roots, when the storm was happening, everything was blowing. They're just steady. It's fantastic.
That's beautiful. I am reading Ketanji Brown Jackson's memoir right now, and what you said just reminded me of that because her family's from Florida. Her parents had moved north, but then they moved back to Miami when she was little because they wanted to be around family. And that's how she describes growing up. Yeah, there were things going on around, but in that protective community, everyone was building her up and sharing knowledge with her and telling her how important she is. And, this is a health and wellness podcast. And I think our mental health needs us to find our people and be in community. And that's one of the things that I think is so important. I feel in community here in DC, and sometimes it makes me worry about, well, if we move somewhere else, will I find those people again? So you said your people found you. I really want to know more about it. Were you seeking them? Did you stumble upon them?
Well, it's funny because my mother always said to me, and when I moved down here, she said, don't worry, your kids will help you find friends. Just through activities, other parents. My kids were on a swim team. You're sitting in the bleachers, everybody's talking about what's going on. So that was not an issue for me. I want to talk about what you were saying, Elaine, or we're talking about community and reverence for folks who have persevered and really just paved the path for a lot of folks down here. When I first came, I had this fear of the South, and now I'm like, oh no, this is where my ancestors are. Okay. our blood, sweat, and tears are in this soil. Coming south made me realize how patriotic my people are. Okay.
Yeah.
It is definitely ours at least as much as anybody else's, for sure.
So we want to hear about what your life in North Carolina now does for your health. What is your healthy lifestyle that you're enabled by living in the South?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to say, just having the space to breathe is a wonderful thing. It's funny how when I first came down here, I just thought everything was so spread out, but I've become so accustomed to having space. I mean, I do realize I'm fortunate in being able to live in a home, having this space. And I really thought about this during COVID. I mean, we just weren't on top of each other. And we were able to move around outside, grocery shopping, shopping in general, just getting around. But it is car dependent, the culture down here.
Right.
But in terms of the ease of getting things done, that's great. But the ease of exercising outside. So a lot of walking, a lot of trails. You can ride your bike. I actually started, and I can't believe this, I started swimming, and once again, the person who encouraged me and my coach are African Americans. That's it's just like fantastic.
She blows her mind.
Oh, it does, because it's not something you think of as African Americans doing, but you will find folks, and it's just great. We have a mutual friend, Brenda. She came to visit, and I said, let's go swimming. She was like, do you know how hard it is to get to a swimming pool in New York? And I was like, yeah.
Because I grew up there.
It's not like it's such a privileged thing. It's not like it's expensive. The healthiness, the food, I've had more food from farms. They really talk about farm to table.
Right.
You find real farmers markets, not the real niche ones, and the city. Real farmers markets
with real farmers bringing.
The food is just so hearty, and it's not even like it's so sophisticated. It's just like your basic greens and the meat. It's just so good. Just the way life is. I mean, people would tease me when I would go up to New York and I was driving, and I wouldn't honk at anyone. I wasn't in a rush to get around. And I was just like, you just kind of slow down, and it's good. There's just no reason to rush. I mean, I can be a New Yorker. My kids laugh at me. When they were younger, we'd be in the city. I was like, look, when you're walking in the street, you can't be looking around.
No dawdling. No dawdling.
Pay attention. You need to walk straight ahead, Keep moving.
Don't stop.
I have a friend who used to say, walk with a purpose. Walk with a purpose.
But, I laugh at how I'm not like that anymore. And I don't miss that, and I still I have a lot of family in Brooklyn. I love going to see my family, but I give New York 48, 72 hours. That's it. I'm done. I'm done with the pace. I'm done with the chaos. I'm done with everything. I'm like, okay, it's time to go home.
You can breathe. Less stressed.
Way less stressful. Sometimes I still miss the sheer diversity. I'm a people watcher, so I love people being peacocks. I like the people who stand out, who look different. I love that. I applaud people like that. But more of that is starting to come here as people are realizing, especially in the cities. So Durham, Greensboro, Raleigh, you're having more folks who are moving south, and they're bringing that flair with them. What else do I miss? I mean, I just miss my family still. I do miss that sometimes.
Do they come down to visit often?
Not as much as me going to New York. Actually, let me take that back. The older ones don't come as much, okay? But the younger ones have moved south. I'm just reflecting on how this is. I mean, Brooklyn's always in my heart. It's where I grew up. It's what developed me. But I'm just so content living here now. That's the word. Just very happy and content.
You were saying you were having some problems with your back and medical issues after you had your twins up north, and then you came down here. How did you find the health care? Was there any difference in the providers?
Here's the thing, Elaine. I think, in all fairness, and my husband always says this to me, he goes, you doctors, you know how to work the system. I think I can't be completely It's not going to apply to so many other people just because so many of my friends are physicians. Yeah. It's just that I understand the system. So I kind of
You knew how to get what
navigate
you
a little
needed,
bit better.
which is great. That's great.
So, what advice would you give to someone who's not a doctor about things they can do to better manage the system?
I would say there are a lot of advocates now. I mean, you can't do it alone. You know, it's so interesting because my husband now, he's a medical consultant. So he's not a physician, but he helps navigate people with insurance issues. So he's better at that than I am in understanding who your providers are and then how well they refer people and who they're associated with. I mean, I ask him, you know, for other.
That sounds like a much needed job. How do you access that? Who gets to use his service and expertise?
Well, the thing is though, Elaine, so there's so few small private practices now. You know, they're all coalescing. So, you know, I mean, he works for organizations, you know, and helping people. But I would say the emphasis now really needs to be on prevention. It's really about prevention and starting to educate people to eat differently, to move differently, so that we don't become so sick. Okay.
That's one of the things Elaine and I talk about all the time is as we're getting older, how do we build our strength and our health so that we can have a healthy old age, right? And a lot of it is about eating and exercising and, you know, making choices to have the strong and reducing stress and meditating so that we can have the strongest, healthiest mind and bodies going into our senior years.
And, you know, exercise doesn't have to be joining a gym. You know, it just is walking. There was a group down here, girls, Black Girls Run. Have you heard anything like that?
Yeah.
I mean, there need to be more organizations like that. Our friend Elaine, our mutual friend, I mean, she rides with, she's a big cyclist. She rides with a group of Black people. Once again, I was just amazed. I'd come down here. Like I said, I found the African American swimmers, the cyclists, the tennis players. I mean, they're active Americans in here.
Yeah, this younger generation has really already, you know, figured that part out because here there's so many different Black run clubs, and I think they're active, and we need to learn from them, even though our bodies are a little older and they ache a little more when we do these things. Now, I would ask you, do your kids live in the South?
So my daughter's in DC. And one son's in Virginia, one's in Atlanta.
Okay. So,
and it's so, speaking of which, we would go to New York. You know, I realized at some point, whenever we went up there, it was for me. And finally, one of my sons said, "No offense, Mom, but I'm not a fan of New York. It is just too crowded and too dirty." And I was like, okay.
It's all about what you're used to. You know, my daughter, who grew up mostly in North Carolina, went to New York for grad school and stayed there for about 5 years. But after that, she's like, okay, I'm done. I, you know, had enough. I experienced it and I'm ready to go.
Even the one in DC, she's there mainly because her job is more of an international job. So DC has an international, but she always says, I don't see myself here forever. No, they're so used to the space and the quality of living here. They'll tell me in a heartbeat, nothing about New York appeals to them except visiting their family.
As a mom, that feels really good because that means that they were happy where they grew up. So you mentioned that your grandmother, your mother's mother, is from the Hampton, Virginia area.
Newport
News. Yeah, okay. And she is the one who moved to New York?
She moved to New York, like I said, part of the Great Migration. She took her babies at the age of 3. She packed her one suitcase and she moved north and didn't look back.
And what motivated that move?
She said, I knew if I had stayed in Virginia, I would have been barefoot and poor. My kids would have remained without an education. So,
she lived the rest of her life.
Couldn't extract her from New York City.
Yeah.
She was like, no. No.
I wish we'd have done a podcast with her because that would be a great, you know, conversation to hear her thoughts on how New York served her and how that move, the opposite of your move, served her health and wellness.
Well, I will say that she lived to be 96 and she had absolutely no health conditions. And I attribute that to, she grew up on a farm. So she came to New York with this appreciation of whole food, good food. You know, my mother was a phenomenal cook and instilled that in us as well. So this whole thing is new. Unprocessed food, we were
Yeah.
doing that. I wasn't allowed to really to eat fast food growing up, but I also had a mother who cooked really good food, so I never really had a desire to eat fast food. I knew that whatever was cooking at home was way better than McDonald's. My grandmother, I mean, she used to drink flax tea. I mean, who knew? We know now flax is the
Right,
thing. So
exactly.
she already had these habits from being on the farm
Fantastic.
that she brought up to New York with her. And I'll never forget one time I was in New York, I accompanied her to the doctor. And the doctor looked at me and said, I just need to reverse the tables and ask your grandmother what she's doing
To be this
like
healthy.
to be this healthy. Yeah. But she also had rock solid faith. I mean, for what she went through as a single mom with my mom and my aunt, how she didn't have a high school education. Okay. And and she was a housekeeper, saved her money and traveled the world.
Yeah.
Okay. So my first
I
international
love
trips
that.
were with my grandmother, my Nana.
All right,
Okay.
Nana.
She had vision. My Nana just had vision for a better life, and she
And
went
she
for
made
it.
it happen.
She made it happen. Yep.
So it says to me, it doesn't matter where you are. If you have the foundational knowledge about what's important and the things that add to you rather than take away from you can make it happen wherever you decide to be.
Yep. Sometimes I think about my Nana and that look she gave me. I said I'm moving south. She was like, okay,
I can see it. But you were
okay.
moving to a South that was
Did
not the
she
South that she came from.
I tried to tell her about this new South, but that's very hard to convince my grandmother who'd really seen so many horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she never got a chance to visit you once you moved down here?
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
So, if there's a Black woman born and bred in New York who's considering a move to the South, what would you say to her?
Oh, there's a place for you here. There's a place for you to really grow without the urban strife, the urban cost. Um, you will just experience so much. There's so much richness here. It's good. It's good. You'll really thrive. You will.
Thank you.
Um, how do you think being a Black woman affected your experience in making the decision to move, in your transition to the South?
How to be a Black woman? Well, as I said to you, um, I came with this fear. My family was like, "Oh, Celeste, you're going by yourself." I am so good. I mean, it's just like I've blossomed as in my womanhood.
Mm.
I'm very proud of being me, of being African American. It was the best thing I could have done because you really understand your history and how you are so much a part of this country. Okay, it's just not even a question anymore. There's nothing some of these people can say. It just makes me chuckle. And in fact, that's what our mutual friend Elaine taught me. She said, "You'll learn how to laugh when they say stuff that you know is absolutely ridiculous." And you really just want to go, bless your heart.
Bless your ignorant heart.
Keep on believing that if you want to.
Exactly.
So, our last question is a little bit off topic from the conversation that we're having with you today, but what would you need from your medical provider to feel well cared for?
What would I need from my medical provider to feel well cared for? See, once again, I just think me being a physician, I actually really know what to ask my doctor. I have my friend, she has decided to do a unique practice. So she does, it's not quite concierge, but she has changed her business model so that you pay an extra fee so that you have a little better access to her. Okay. So to me, that was valuable. I feel it's just much more personalized. And so she takes the time when we sit down to really hear what my concerns are. Okay. She's my general doctor, but I also have a gynecologist, and She's African American. And I just think, quite honestly, my dentist, most doctors I see are African American women. I'll just tell you that I feel that's really important to me. But the wonderful thing about it is I have that choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Just think about that.
Well, I'm happy that you're happy with what you're getting. And I just wanted to touch on one more thing. I know that once you moved to North Carolina, you were able to make some connections with people, which allowed you to actually find out more about your ancestry before this country.
So my father's father was Liberian and true immigrant. He left his country when he was about 15. He worked for about 15 years working on ships, landed in New York, met my grandmother. So he came here, saved his money. He bought property in New York, and he created this foundation that enabled his wife's family to come up from the South and land in New York, okay, have a solid foundation to which to continue their lives. And he also had relatives from Liberia. So he passed before I was born, and I heard about this man, how wonderful, what my grandfather did. I started attending this Episcopal church, and I sit next to this wonderful African couple. So the woman and I talk. Long story short, we're talking, find out my grandfather and her mother are from, we think, are from the same village. So I get on the phone, start calling my relatives and trying to get the information. And she just said to me, "Oh, I'm taking you home. I'm taking you home. This wasn't an accident at all, Celeste. And your grandfather, he put us together for a reason." So early this year, we did go to Liberia, went to Cape Palmas. It was a life experience. I found my family found me, and it was through her family and her relatives. And by the way, I keep saying her family. We're related. She's in my
You really, really found your people.
Yeah, I'm still processing it because there's so many things that we as African Americans do that the Africans do. It's just, I had never been there, but it was all familiar at the same time. It was a very strange feeling.
Love that story.
I've never been a journaler, and I just had to start journaling. I mean, my husband's like, "You got to journal when you go to Africa." You got. I'm so glad I did, because it's all like part of my wholeness. Coming here to the South is a big part of my family, but I was raised in New York. I was like, I have nothing to do with that place. I have a lot to do with the South. Okay, it is a part of who I am. Okay, I didn't realize it. Going to Africa, I mean, I just feel like this has been such a blessing. It's just really kind of putting so many elements of me together, and it makes it very solid. It's been great. It's been great.
I love that. I love
so
that
happy
so much.
for you there. Thank you so much for your time.
No, this was great.
Thanks for listening. Want to hear our take on this conversation? Check out our After the Show episode right here. For resources related to today's topic, see the show notes.
If you want to support Body Wealth, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. We'd also love it if you give us a 5-star rating and write a review letting us know what you love about the show.
The Body Wealth podcast shares personal stories to inspire you. It does not constitute medical advice. For that, we encourage you to work with a trusted healthcare provider. We also want to remind you that the views expressed by our guests are their own.
This podcast is dedicated to our mother, Jean Fernandez Barbour, who showed us what advocating for yourself really looks like.